You guys doing all right? Great morning this morning. The sun is out. No, it's not, but the snow is. And that reflects enough light outside to make it feel like it's a nice day outside. So it's great, not too cold out there. Glad that you guys are with us. If you're joining with us online, I want to welcome you as well. We are in week 3 of our series that we're calling Don't Miss Your Life, where we are asking the question each week, how do you live life to the full? How do you live life to the full? Now, this question comes from the Gospel of John, John 10:10, where Jesus says, I've come so that they could have life, and they could have life abundantly. He says, the whole reason why I came, the whole reason why I'm here at this time, Jesus said, was so that I can give people real life. Life that they've never experienced before. Life beyond the mundane of just trying to make it day after day after day. I was thinking of it this week. I was going through some ideas of what this life looks like, and what came to me was Mindy. Many of you guys know Mindy Gooden. So some of you guys know that my wife Amy and I are going through a transition right now in our family. My wife had a cochlear implant. And if you've ever known, my wife's profoundly deaf, and when you have that, that's a major life shift. And it's one of those things that has, the recovery of this has impact. It's one of these times where it's like, if mom goes down, everybody goes down, right? So like, it's affected everybody in the family as she's recovering through all of these things. And first, before I go too far into it, I want to thank so many of this church family that has just poured out your love to our family and taking care of us and meeting needs and meals and all those kinds of things. Thank you guys so much. It's been an amazing journey that we've been on. And so a couple weeks ago, Mindy decided to do something fun for my kids and bring them some ice cream. Now, if you are a part of my family, you kind of know where this is going. When we get ice cream, I dish it out, right? This is how I do. Now, I do this. Now, don't judge me. Again, we have 6 kids, so here's how I do it. If we get ice cream, everybody gets 1 scoop, right? You get 1 scoop of ice cream, because in a container of ice cream with 6 kids, 1 scoop each means that my wife and I might get 2 scoops of ice cream at the end. And I'm stingy like that. So everybody gets 1 scoop. So you can imagine their faces when I come in with a box. They're kind of looking at the box, and I set it down. And it not only had 1 container of ice cream, but it had 2 containers of ice cream in it. My kids are like, ice cream for all. Like, everyone's going to get multiple scoops. They're excited. And then all of a sudden, their mouths open as I pull out whipped cream. And then hot fudge. And then caramel. And then chocolate chips, and then sprinkles, and then cookies that you can crumble. And I'm thinking, Mindy, what are you doing? The kids have never had it this good. They're going to expect this every single time. This is life to the full. This is what Jesus is talking about when he gives this example. He says, I've come so that you can have this life that's not 1 scoop. It is the whole box. It is everything. Abundant. It's a life that is so full that you don't even know what to do with all of it. This is the life that Jesus has come to give each and every one of us. Now, Christ offers us this life that's full, but we talked about over the last couple of weeks that we know that we have the evil one, right? We have the one who's the enemy who's coming at us. And make it clear, the enemy that we have is not, I want to clarify, it's not a bad feeling, it's not bad karma or anything. It is a created being, an angel, a fallen angel, and his name is Satan. And he is here on this earth, and he has a plan, and he has an agenda for each and every one of us. He has come to, it says here in John 10:10, the thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. He wants to come in, he wants to take away all the toppings of life, right? All the fun stuff like that. And then he'll take the ice cream. And then he takes the bowl. And then he takes the spoon. And then he takes the napkin. And then he takes it all away. That's his plan. All the things that God has for you and for me, this life that he's given to us to live in abundance, he wants to come and steal it all away. He wants to kill. He wants to kill hopes and dreams. This is the agenda that he has. And so I want you to see what we've got for today. The thing that you need to understand is that Satan's number one strategy, the number one strategy that Satan has is to move you into isolation. Because bad things happen in isolation. And that's his plan. Now, before we get into Peter, we're going to look at the life of Peter. We've been kind of digging through this. Before we do, I want to give a quick clarifying 30 seconds on the difference between isolation and solitude. Right? Isolation, as we're defining it here, isolation is when you are all alone with no one else around. Solitude, the Greek word for solitude, what it means is it's a place that's set apart from everybody else. It's apart from distractions. Now we see Jesus multiple times throughout the scriptures. We see Jesus leave and he goes into solitude. He goes to be alone with God the Father. A private time, just he and God. But isolation is different. Isolation is when you cut yourself off from other people, when you cut yourself off from the support that God has to offer. So throughout this morning, as we're going through this message, I want you to constantly be asking yourself this question. I want you to ask yourself, are there areas of my life where I am isolated? Are there areas of my life where I've allowed myself to isolate, to pull away from everybody else? Last couple weeks, we've looked at this guy named Peter, one of the disciples. And again, I think many times when we open up the Bible and we start talking about these disciples, we think they're like these superhuman people, these crazy people who follow Jesus. When the reality is these guys were just like you and me. And this guy, Peter, the reality is he was just trying to make it by day to day. He was just doing his work. He was a fisherman, and he goes to work each day, and he does the work, and he's just trying to make ends meet when all of a sudden Jesus shows up. And it says he shows up by the Sea of Galilee. And when Jesus showed up, Jesus showed him that he has the ability to offer this life. This morning we're going to look at the fact that the life that he offers Peter isn't a whole lot different than the life that he offers to you and to me. This week I'm going to look at Peter and see a few times in Peter's life that I think looks a little bit like my life from time to time, probably a little bit like yours. So let's get caught up here. Peter is, again, if you're just joining us, join into the story here. Peter's this fisherman. Jesus shows up. He says, I want to make you fisher of men. At this point, he goes, the job that you're going to have now, Peter, is this kingdom of God, this forgiveness for all people, this forgiveness that he has, is your job is to help spread that, to tell everybody that this is for everybody. Everybody can do this now. You need to go out and spread this word. And so he joined this group of disciples that then followed Jesus, lived with Jesus, followed what Jesus was saying, wanting to make their lives look like Jesus. And ultimately, their job was to bring what's called God's kingdom to all of the people. But again, most of us know the story. As Jesus came, God's people, they turned him, they rejected him. They turned him away and they said, we're not going to do this. Which eventually led him to a cross where Jesus had to make the ultimate sacrifice for these people. And this is where we're going to pick it up. If you've got your Bibles, turn with me to the book of John, John chapter 18. We're going to pick it up in the garden. This is right before Jesus is betrayed, right before Jesus goes to this cross. He's with his disciples in the garden. They've been praying, this intense time of prayer. As they've been praying, that the disciples are there, and Jesus is praying, knowing what's to come here in just a few minutes. He's to be betrayed and then taken to a cross, and his disciples are there with him. And here's what it says, starting in verse 3. It says, so Judas, and again, one of the other disciples here, just missed it here. He says, so Judas, having obtained the Roman cohort and officers and the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, came out into the open and said, whom are you seeking? And they answered him and said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I am he. And Judas also who was betraying him was standing with them. And when he said, I am he, they drew back and they fell to the ground. And he asked again, whom are you seeking? They said, Jesus the Nazarene. And he answered, I told you that I am he, so if you're seeking me, let these men go on their way. This took place so that the word which was spoken would be fulfilled, that those whom you have given to me, I have not lost one. Then Simon Peter, since he had a sword, he drew it. And he struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. And Jesus said to Peter, put the sword in the sheath. The cup that the Father has given me, am I not to drink it? I love this scene because you really catch up who Peter is. Peter's the guy, if you remember, when Jesus shows up on the water, Peter's the guy that just jumps right out into the water. He jumps right out, runs out to God right there on the water. Peter is known for making these fast decisions where Peter is all in. Right now, in this moment, in the garden, people are showing up with torches and all these different things, and Peter is all in. He's got his sword drawn. He was ready to take on the entire Roman army. He believed Jesus was with them. The disciples were with them. We're going to take these guys. You're not having Jesus. He was ready. He was on fire for what God has for him. I think, how many times have we been there? Have you been there? Where you've had those moments when it's those mountaintop moments when you're like, I'm in. I am all in. This is it. I am completely on fire. A lot of times, if you've been around here long, this happens when you go on a missions trip. This happens when we do the retreats. At the end of men's and women's Bible studies and groups and things like that, when we're just like, I am all in. That there's, no matter what God's going to give me now, no matter what life experiences are going to happen, I'm going to follow God and stay true to him. But most of us know that we've got to be careful at that moment. Because the thing about these mountaintop experiences, most of the time we realize on the other side of the mountain is a valley. You have to come down on the other side, and the valley is when it gets really hard. Let's keep reading here in verse 15, just a few verses later. Simon Peter was following Jesus. Jesus now had been arrested and was taken away. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so there was another disciple. Now the disciple was known to the high priest, and he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. The slave woman, who was the doorkeeper, said to Peter, you're not also one of these men's disciples, are you? And he said, I am not. Now Simon Peter was still standing warming himself, and so they said to him, you're not one of his disciples as well, are you? And he denied it again, and he said, I am not. One of the slaves of the high priest, who was related to the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? And Peter denied it again, and then immediately the rooster crowed. Now, do you understand what just happened here? From verse 11 to where Peter was ready to take on the entire Roman army, to verse 15, 4 verses later, everything changed. In just 4 verses, you have a shift in Peter that has changed the direction of how he viewed life and everything else. See, I think in this passage, we see Satan's number one strategy that he uses as he moved Peter into isolation. away from his support, away from the community that was around him. And he was robbing Peter from this life that he has. You see, Peter was with Jesus and his disciples. He was surrounded by the people who were his support. I think of it, he was with the people on the missions trip, the people on the retreat, the people in the class. When you're surrounded by all of the people who are right with you, who are supporting you, who are excited, and you're sharing prayer requests, and you're feeding off of each other's energy, and you know that God is going to show up, and you've got that comfortable moment of that, this is my community, this is my people. But then when we come back from the retreat and we go back to life, out of that community, we go back to work each week. We go back to the grind, we drive to work, we show up at the office, and we go right back to work as it is, and we're not surrounded by that community. It gets hard all of a sudden when life becomes real again. And Peter now finds himself a few verses later from that alone and isolated. And the pressure's on him. Number one strategy was to move you to isolation because bad things happen in isolation. I read a report from the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine about the 2020, the effects of isolation as a result of the pandemic. And here's some of the things that it showed right here. It says, isolation significantly increased a person's risk of premature death and it went through of all causes. Next one. It says isolation was associated with about 50% increased risk of dementia in older folks. Isolation or loneliness was associated with 29% increased risk of heart disease, 32% of stroke. Isolation was associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Isolation is associated with 68% increased risk of having to go to the hospital and 57% risk of an increase of going to the emergency room. Now, was anyone shocked by these? Because probably not. Even as I read them, I find we're not surprised by these stats because if you've gone through what we've gone through over the last year, most of us know that isolation can't be good for you. Right? It just can't. And yet I'm amazed as I talk with people, I'm still amazed at how many people are still trying to do life alone. We still try to do life each and every day, each and every week alone and by ourselves. We go through life without the support and the accountability of people around us. And this is why as a church we've worked so hard, even in the day and age where we are, where some things are unavoidable, we've tried so hard to build an online community. So that even in the separation, we have community and not isolation. Yet people follow, I was listening this week, Simon and Garfunkel, right? They believe that I am a rock, I'm an island, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. We can do it on our own. We can stand on our own. We really don't need everyone else around us. But we do. And the problem is those are the lies that Satan wants you to believe. Satan wants you to believe that you can do it on your own. It's exactly where he wants to move you. Because when you are isolated, you are vulnerable, you are weak, and you are powerless. Isolation leaves you vulnerable. Isolation will leave you vulnerable. When you're alone, you're vulnerable. Okay, it's not rocket science. We see it all the time on the Discovery Channel, right? You've got the deer, the antelope, the one who just kind of wanders away from the herd. They're the ones that get picked off, right? They're in a vulnerable position when they're away from everybody else. And the same is true for you and me. As we isolate ourselves away from community, we become vulnerable for bad decisions. Vulnerable for sin in our lives, vulnerable for justifying just about everything. I'll never cease to be amazed at how, I've said it before from right here, at how when we are by ourselves, we can convince ourselves of anything. I deserve to have this attitude. I deserve to have this opinion. I deserve to do this or to not do this. And we can justify it in our minds because in our own minds, in isolation, we can come up with any and every reason for it. The reality is more times than not, these are just lies that Satan is putting into our lives to keep us in isolation, to keep us vulnerable. When you're vulnerable, you're vulnerable to all that Satan wants to throw at you. In those moments, Satan is going to continue to throw more and more temptations, more and more struggles at you as you're in isolation. So think about it. Are there areas of my life that I have allowed to creep into isolation? Are there areas of my life that's none of your business? Areas of life that we want to keep away from other people? Are there areas that are in isolation? It'll leave you vulnerable, but it also leaves you weak. Isolation will leave you weak. It puts you in a place where you can barely make it by day to day. Again, Satan takes those moments when you're in isolation, and very rarely do we ever have one struggle, but it comes in waves. We know this, we feel this, right? When it gets hard like that, it just comes in waves and waves and waves. And when you are in isolation, you do not have the support of the people around you. You don't have the community coming around saying, you can do this, we can push through this. And all of a sudden you start believing this lie that Satan gives us, which is, again, his lie, he says, I'm the only one. I'm the only one who struggles with this. I'm the only one who has a wayward child. I'm the only one whose marriage is on the rocks. I'm the only one, whatever it is, we keep going back through it again and again. I'm the only one who has to deal with this. Have you had these thoughts? Have you ever had those thoughts? Did you think about that maybe even on the way here to church where you're thinking, I'm the only one who's going through what I'm going through. They just don't understand. Well, guess what? That's a lie. I can tell you that no matter who you are, no matter what you're dealing with, no matter what the struggle is, you are not the only one. And Satan uses this to keep you down. Every week, again, I'm amazed when we sit in counseling and I'm working with couples, and they're amazed when they find out that they are not the only ones whose marriage is on the rocks in this place. Right? Their child is not the only child dealing with a drug issue right now within our church. And people are amazed when they find out that they're not the only one. But isolation will leave you vulnerable. Isolation leaves you in a place to where you're weak. But it also makes you powerless. Again, it's not rocket science here. You have less power when you are alone than you do when you are with others. You probably heard the illustration. Like, North America, one of the strongest animals is the horse. The horse can pull up to 8,000 pounds, right? So it makes sense if one horse can pull 8,000 pounds, then two horses should be able to pull twice the amount, or 16,000 pounds, right? Except they don't. One horse will pull 8,000 pounds. Two horses can pull up to 32,000 pounds. They're just stronger when they're together. There's more power when they're together. Your greatest potential in making a lasting impact in this world is never found in doing it alone. You want to make an impact in this world that goes beyond you, that goes beyond what your scope of influence is. It never happens with you doing it alone. Think of the old African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. See, there's safety in community. There's strength in community. There's power in community. And so think of it again. Ask the question again. Are there areas of my life that I've chosen to keep in isolation? Because if they are, you're vulnerable in those areas. You're weak in those areas, and you're powerless in those areas. You see, community is the cure to isolation. Community is the cure to isolation. I've watched people come out of quarantine over the last several months for one reason or another, and whether it's to the hospital, the doctors, or they're healthy, they feel more comfortable, whatever it is, as they come out. Every single person I've met with, everybody has the same first reaction, the first response, which is, I'm just glad to see people. Right? Have you been there? Like, I'm just so glad to be with people. I'm so glad to see people again. My family is a physical family. I oftentimes joke that our love language is physical touch, and so, it's just the way we do it. So my wife is like dying right now. She says that she just goes and she's like, I just hate not being able to hug people. I keep telling her, be careful when we come out of quarantine, she's going to go up and start hugging perfect strangers everywhere she goes. Like, it's just what she does. See, we need this community. Community is the cure to isolation because there is safety in community. When you're in community, there's safety there. Proverbs 11:14 says, where there is no counsel, the people will fall, but in a multitude of counselors, there is safety. See, isolation makes you vulnerable to bad decisions and failure. But there's safety in community. We've all seen the leaders, the number of leaders, both Christian and secular leaders, who fall morally, who fail in so many different ways. They embezzle this, they run off with them, they just do all these things and they fall morally. And I was reading a report from Harvard Business News. It was actually from 2011. They went through all these different leaders at that time that had failed in one way or another. And this report said there's one thing that they all had in common. You know what it was? The one thing that all of them had in common is that they didn't have community in their life. They no longer had people around them who was able and ready to speak into their lives. They lacked the community that they needed, which brings accountability, which brings wise counsel. And when you don't have that community in your life, you're vulnerable to bad decisions. You're vulnerable to sin and to weaknesses. Again, this is why we try so hard to focus right here at our church to build community. We don't want to be vulnerable. I remember when Amy and I were first married, I was working with my in-laws, and my brother-in-law, I was actually working side by side with my brother-in-law. And we kind of grew up together. He was my prayer partner, accountability partner all through high school. And we were working, and he found something in my life that was really something that was an inconsistency. He noticed that again, it was probably just a family trait. He goes, you have an opinion about everything. He noticed that no matter what was going on, I always had an opinion. I always had a thought. And finally, he stopped. He was like, this is really, because sometimes you really don't even know what you're talking about. And he told me, he goes, if you don't have an opinion about something, you don't have to have an opinion. And I remember in that moment, it was that moment of like, what? It hurts. And yet, I learned so much from that. That was all the way back when we were first married, and it's still am learning from that today. See, that's the kind of community that I'm talking about. Not just people. I'm not saying we just need to be around people. You need to be around the right people. A Christian community that's building into you, that's able to speak truth and life into you, that goes beyond the moment right now. This is what community looks like. There's safety in community. There's also strength in community. Ecclesiastes 4:10 says, if one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But if someone who falls alone is in real trouble. See, there's strength in community. Community is where we come alongside one another and we support each other. We help each other. We build each other. There's all of those passages that we look at time and time again to where we care for one another, build one another up, love one another, pray for one another. I love this week, we had a prayer time for Pastor Lud Goltz, our founding pastor. A quick update, a group of us went up to the hospital there, in Euclid Hospital there, and stood outside and was praying for him. There's about 15 of us there praying for him at that time. We had an additional, I don't know, it was like 30 or so people online in the online community joining together as we came together, as the scriptures tell us to pray for one another. I wanted a quick update, just keep praying. I think Lud's made a positive turn. He's feeling a little better, but he's still not yet breathing on his own, and so we just got to keep praying that he can get to that point to where he's breathing on his own again. But that's what this community is for. That's how we support one another. That's how we build each other up. We're called to do this. Ecclesiastes 4:12 says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is why we do community as a church, because it brings strength in the moments when we need it the most. There's safety in community, there's strength in community, there's power in community. The truth is we are actually better together. We really do. We say that a lot here, but it's because we believe it. We are better together. We can make a much bigger impact on eternity when we are together, moving in the same direction. The early church said that they met together, they shared meals together, they shared property, they shared all things together. And as a result, it says in Acts 2, it says, the Lord added to their numbers daily those who were being saved. They did life together, and as a result, people's eternities were changed as they did life together. To be honest with you, this is one of the things I love the most about our church. If you're new here, if you're visiting with us, you have to understand this place is a family. And I love that. We've got so many things that are great aspects of the church. Our worship, obviously, you guys have known, our worship is amazing. The building is beautiful. We've got the preaching is biblical. But I tell you what, above everything else, this place is a community. It's a family that comes together. The people here are a family, and we care for one another. And when you're part of the family, you're part of something so much bigger than just us. You're part of something that is actually making an impact on the east side of Cleveland, making an impact in the world around. And that's powerful. It's powerful what God's doing. Now, before we close up, I want to turn quickly to Matthew chapter 16. Just one more small day in the life of Peter here. Matthew chapter 16, Jesus is walking with the disciples, and as they're walking down, he looks at the people and he says, hey, disciples, Peter, guys, who do they say I am? And these guys turned to him and said, well, they say you're John the Baptist or Elijah or Jeremiah, one of these other prophets. And he says, well, who do you, he looks at Peter and goes, who do you say I am? Here's what Peter says. It says, Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who's in heaven. And then he says one of the most profound things that I think we miss sometimes. It's amazing. He says, and I also say to you that you are Peter. And upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overpower it. He says, you are Peter. The Greek word for Peter, Petra, right there means pebble or stone. And so he's declaring, he goes, you are the pebble. It's not very impressive. He said, that's who you are. You are the pebble. But on this rock, what rock? The declaration that the pebble made. The declaration that the pebble said that Jesus is the Son of the living God, that Jesus is the one who's come to forgive our sins, to be the Savior of the people, to redeem the people. Because upon this rock, I'm going to build you up into the rock. No, he didn't say that. That's not the promise. He didn't promise him. He didn't say that a life to the full is when you get all these great things, when you've got the job that you wanted, when you get the toys that you want. He's just saying, if you do all of these things, I'm going to build you up to where you have all kinds of things. He didn't say any of that. He says, you are the pebble. But on this pebble, on the statement that the pebble made, I'm going to use that. I'm going to set that on top of a rock, and I'm going to build my church. I'm going to build a community that is so powerful, it says that the gates of hell won't be able to stop it when we storm the gates. And that's the declaration. Don't miss this. God will take the smallest pebble, the person who has really messed up your life, who you're sitting here saying, I've really messed up my life. I have made a mess of it. I've made bad decisions. I'm embarrassed at how small I am in the kingdom within all these things. All the people here are so much bigger. I'm just a little pebble. And God says, I'm going to take that pebble and I place it on the rock to build something bigger. And I'm going to make it firm and solid. I'm going to build a community. And I'm going to build a place that the gates of hell cannot even stand it when we storm these gates. This is what God has called us to. God has called each and every one of us to take the areas of our lives and to pull it out of isolation and into the light and into community. How do you live life to the full? You become strong in community. That's how we do it.